So what I'm going to say
What is
is,
she doing there?
this is Carolyn.
Thank you.
She knows about Mayor Baba. She went to Assisi and she wrote a book. And that's who she is.
That's right.
She is a lover of God, Mayor Baba.
There we go. Thank you. So this book is called Meher Baba in Assisi. I had been hearing Assisi, people, I kept hearing it over and over. My brother mentioned it, a friend mentioned it, I don't know why, but it just kept coming up. And at some point, I just sort of felt like I was being compelled to go to Assisi. I had never even been interested in going to Europe at all. I was fine just to lay over in Paris or whatever on the way to Mehrabad. And so all of a sudden it's like, I have to go to Assisi. And I didn't know why, but I was compelled, so I took off. And so I've had 3 trips there, and I feel that the reason why I was compelled was to bring this little book out. Meher Baba in Assisi. And it really afforded me an opportunity to study a good amount about what Baba did there. So the book is about sharing that with folks. So the first thing I want to read is from Lord Meher. One of the reasons for Baba's trip was that he wished to remain in seclusion for 24 hours somewhere in Italy, and chose Assisi for the purpose because of its association with St. Francis. Baba sent Herbert there on 1 August 1932 in search of a cave for the seclusion. In the meantime, Baba visited Portofino and other places near Santa Margherita in the north of Italy. So here is a quote from Delia Leon from The Ocean of Love. On his return to Portofino, Baba was in high spirits and told us about his great meeting in the cave with all the saints and masters of the 6th and 7th plane, and how they had mapped out the spiritual destiny of the world for the next 2,000 years. So obviously, it was a relatively important meeting. This is what Baba said about it. A meeting of spiritual personages took place here, the likes of which has never before been held. So Baba obviously put great emphasis on it. These are slides I took over the 3 different visits. And what I want to do is share a little bit about little bits and pieces, and it's all summarized here in this 80-page book. The first section is kind of like how I felt like Baba made me go, and what my early first experiences were there in Assisi. And we're going to talk a little bit about Baba. Baba's story of being in Assisi is shared and quoted in this book, actually excerpts from Lord Meher and from the God-Man and from Delia's book, Ocean of Love. So important parts of the story is that Baba took Chanji and Kakabaria, and he also took Herbert and Quentin Todd. So those are pictures all taken probably just before or just after his time in Assisi. He had sent Quentin in advance to map out the area and find a cave for him. So we're going to talk a little bit about Baba's venture there, and then what I'm going to do is take you through slides as Baba walked back down through the town, so you can also kind of meet St. Francis a little bit more. Then there's a section of the book about a travel section. So if anybody wants to go, I actually my 3rd trip there was really to try to get all the information anyone might need if they were going to go to Assisi. There's a section of people's stories. Like, how many people in this room have been to Assisi? Yeah, a bunch. So several people who are here Mehernush is in the book. Anybody? Anne is in the book. And so, did I leave anybody else that's in the room right here? So a lot of people had really amazing experiences in Assisi. And so there's a section of the book that shares some of those stories. And then there's the life of St. Francis. And finally, a little bit of my own conjecturing about what was Baba doing there. Of course, he always tells us we don't know. But we can see some of the effects. So there's a little bit, all that in 80 pages. There's a lot of stuff in here. It was a special price if you only had 80 pages, so I took 120 pages and packed it in closely. But it's color. There's lots of pretty colored pictures. So many of the ones that you're going to see are in the book. So Baba sent Herbert ahead, and Herbert discovered, coming into the town, this is an iconic picture of Assisi right here. He found the cave, and what I want to point out here is a couple things that are really important to the story. The Windsor Savoia, where Baba stayed, is here. This is the Basilica of San Francesco, of St. Francis. Down at the other end of town is the Basilica of St. Clair. And then up here is where the cave is. Up. And this is called Mount Subasio. This is actually all Mount Subasio here. But you can take a drive up through the mountains there, and you can't really quite see it, but right in that niche there is where that was. And St. Francis's early time was down a little bit further than you can see in the picture here, but there is a river, and he stayed in a place called Rivo Torto. Rivo Torto means the crooked river. And Francis would wander up along the river to this niche here. There was a little teeny hermitage up there, and that's where they created the caves, the different caves. And the furthest one is the one that Baba stayed in and did his universal work. So he was there for about 24 hours. During that time, he sent, Herbert and Chanji went down into town, stayed with him rather, while Kaka and Quentin went down into town. And Baba told Kaka and Quentin to go to Mass in the cathedral, in the Basilica of St. Francis. So while Baba was doing his work up in the cave, they were going to Mass. And so to me, this sort of got me interested in the idea of what was Baba doing here, what was being created. At the in the next day, they came back, and Quentin came back with Kaka, and they brought food. They had a little picnic, and then Herbert led Baba down through the town, and a path that we're going to try to follow with our pictures here, until they got to the Windsor Savoia. So they actually walked this whole distance down here, and then Baba walked him past several different places until they got to the Windsor Savoia over here. Okay? So here's a little map of the city. The picture was taken from about down here. So you're seeing the cathedral here, and then this is the road. This is St. Clair's Basilica, and then this is the road out of town that winds up to the Hermitage. Hermitage is called the Eremo delle Carcere, the Hermitage of the enclosed or imprisoned. So it sort of meant the caves, okay? So we'll come back to that a little bit later. So this is a picture from the distance as you're kind of getting out of your car and you're looking into the, you can see the Hermitage here, and then person can walk these pathways and cut down. You can kind of see the edge of where the river runs, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. But you walk along a path here, and then you wind down here. Baba's cave is over here, okay? All right. So for those of you who are planning on going, as you go into the grounds of the Hermitage, there is a list of the different caves. And they're actually not really caves, they're like little lean-tos that they've built some rock around. And Number 15 is a Grotta del Beato Andrea di Spello. Remember that number because that's Baba's cave, number 15, okay? And here is, if you are going, there is a map. And the way this is driving in, you drive in here, and then this is the entrance to the Hermitage. This is a walkway here. You actually walk through the Hermitage, you come out the other side, and you follow, again, a walkway. But here is where you wind down. So if a person were going to find Baba's cave, if you took a snapshot of this with your cell phone, you could actually follow down here, crossing a little ravine, up the other side, and here's Baba's cave. It's the very last one. Here's some folks that you might know. This is on the way into the Hermitage. This is looking from the Hermitage through. You can actually look all the way down the ravine, through the ravine to the valley below. So the area there, when I first went there, I was absolutely stunned because to me it looks an awful lot like the mountains of North Carolina. It's almost identical. The flowers were very, very similar. And it just is this gorgeous mountain area along with this beautiful Umbrian stonework. Just gorgeous. This is as you come out the other side and you look over the edge and you can see the valley below. And then this is as you're starting down the path to go to Baba's cave, and you can turn around and you can see the stonework in that whole part of Italy is just absolutely stunning. A lot of this stone is from the Mount Subasio, just cut from the mountain and carried down. It was actually used, at times, it was used as like money. Those stones were so precious and the building was so important, so that the stones really were very valuable to folks. This is the walkway down to on the way down to Baba's cave, and you follow it down, and you can see the bottom of the ravine here. It's actually, there's a little cross right behind the street. Then you start up the other side, and you soon discover Baba's cave. What's interesting, and this is at the bottom of the ravine, so you know you've kind of hit the bottom, and that's where the water comes through in the rainier times. Now this picture was taken by Daniel Montague when he was coming back from Baba's cave. And he went back, went to India. He's going through his pictures, and he sees this picture, and then he sees the one afterwards. And he's about to delete the picture when he sees that Baba, it's Baba pointing down the path to his cave. Do you see? If you can't see, there's Baba's face. Daniel's like, you have to put this book in color because otherwise people won't see his pink jacket and his sadra right there. Look at it. So pretty awesome, right? So I'm going to go back so you can see. Here's Baba's sadra. Here's Baba's pink coat pointing. There's Baba's face. Isn't that really cool? So that made it, and that's why he kept saying, I had to do a color book, so I didn't have a choice.
Oh my God.
Isn't that neat? Does everybody see it? Yeah.
Could you stand aside for 1 second?
Oh, certainly. You're still here.
No, I can see it, yeah.
You see it?
Yeah. Can you see it?
Okay. Yeah. So there's so as you're following along the path, that's what you're going to see. Now I will say, if you are heading that way, they have cordoned off the pathway that just goes down to Baba's cave. And I thought first of all, that was not a good thing, but then I was thinking, well, actually it's kind of cool, because the only people that know to go beyond that are Baba people, so they can find Baba's cave. So this was my first time in there, and if you can imagine, just like coming around that corner, and it's sort of like, that's Baba's cave there. And there's just this amazing experience of I'm finally there. There's a little bit of a close-up. And then my first experience of it, Valeria had just had a Sahavas, like, I don't know, a week before or something like that. And so a bunch of people had been on pilgrimage there. And I walk in, and there's Baba pictures everywhere. And we're very, very lucky because the Benedictines own this land. And it's really important, I think, that we respect that land. Somebody had actually carved Avatar AMBKJ on this little area here. And so there's a little thing in my book about, please, when Baba left, he was very specific that they left nothing behind.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a little part in the book about, let's take care of this area. We are being permitted to come as guests and use it. The Benedictines every once in a while come down and kind of clean it up, and then Baba lovers come and put more, and they allow us to do this. So we're very fortunate. The day before I went up, or the morning that I went up, I was sitting at a little coffee shop and I was reading all the paperwork that I could find about Baba's cave and what he was doing there. And one little thing that I noticed, that I read, was that Baba took a rosary, a St. Francis rosary, up into the cave with him. So once again, I'm starting to think about, this is interesting. There's something going on here in how his work is interfacing with the Catholic tradition. So when I went in, right before I went and bought 10 rosaries, and they're beautiful rosaries. They're made out of olive wood, and they're just, they smell good. So I brought all of them in to be blessed in Baba's cave. So that's the little altar there. At the very top, you can see the St. Francis cross right there. And Francis, he didn't want to try to ever do anything that was better than Jesus. So he created a cross that he called the Tau. And this shape here is it's a little bit more like a T, but this is a Tau right there. So his was a little less, his cross was less than Jesus's cross.
Is it a small area inside?
Okay, let me back up there. That is, like the door is right here, and then what would be right along here. Okay, so there's a kind of another stone area that you can sit, and so you're just facing that. So it's probably not more than 5 feet, I would say, deep.
Yeah, I'd say the width is a little less than 5 feet, and the length is a little less than 9 feet.
Yeah, I was going to say 7 or 9, something like that. Yeah.
Carolyn, would you go back to the front view of all the beautiful cards just for a moment?
Oh.
That.
And people had left flowers, and so it was all just loved, recently loved by Baba.
And did you leave the rosaries there, or did you bring them with you?
I brought them home, and gave them to people and kept them. So that was a very sweet experience. Okay, so I'm going to read another little piece here. So after Baba had completed his work, they had a little picnic, and then Baba was still kind of in an altered state, I guess. And so he needed help walking down. So they kind of wrapped things up around 6 o'clock, and they started walking. And they walked that whole pathway that I mentioned down the road. And it was sunset time, it was late evening, and Baba specifically noted how much he thought the Umbrian countryside was beautiful. Let me see if I can read 2 little sections here about it.
Carolyn, what time of year was it when he was
August 6th was the date. August, I think 6th into 7th. Yeah. Okay. Baba, though content with his work accomplished, was in great pain. We had to support him. This is, I think this is Herbert writing. So we had to support him during our descent from the mountain. one on either side of Baba. We would run together down the steep path. It seemed as if the jolting and physical exercise helped to bring him down to earth. He looked like someone dazed, suffering from a severe headache. Climbing up through the dark ilex trees, we came onto the road. We stood on a quarry mound and looked across the valley, purple shadows and distant lights twinkling, and above the line of hills, the afterglow of a golden sunset. Baba, despite his pain, once we had to lay him down by the roadside, was entranced by the beauty of the Umbrian landscape. St. Francis must have walked this road and enjoyed this scene. The feeling that we had assisted in a great spiritual work, though we did not understand it. Baba's presence and suffering and the setting made our descent from the mountain memorable. So that was Herbert's explanation. And then this is the one from Lord Mayher. Coming out of this transcendent state, Baba seemed dazed as he walked down the hill toward the town. By the time they reached Assisi, Baba appeared more normal. Herbert took Baba around the town, showing him the main places associated with St. Francis. Baba went past the home of Bernardo, Francis's first disciple. Baba pointed to a rock outside the house and disclosed, "This is the spot where St. Francis sat and meditated on me, Christ, weeping throughout the whole night with love for Christ." When I reread this, I went, okay, so if Herbert walked Baba through the town, which places did he go? And what places were important? Baba only spoke about one in particular, aside from sending the two of the Mandali to the Basilica for the Mass. But he just pointed out that one place in particular. But we can conjecture what Baba might have seen and what he might have maybe left his nazar on. It's interesting, Nick Principe has been there, and he said it's very interesting that not a lot of pilgrimage was going on to Assisi until after Baba was there. An interesting piece. I don't know where he got that.
What year was this? That Baba was there?
Baba was there in 1932.
32?
August
That was in
6th and 7th, 1932. Thanks. This is just outside the cave, and just a couple pictures of the flowers that they might have seen on the way on their walk down back into town. As you come into town, you come off the hill and you come through this portal here, and you come around to this church. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about St. Francis on the way by, because Francis was I think, probably lived the ultimate new life. He lived the new life his whole life. I mean, from the time of what they call his conversion. He absolutely turned his life over to God. He lived by God's will all the time. He lived in poverty, and the idea of relying solely on God was Francis's entire life. And there's a book I want to recommend because I think it's maybe the best spiritual book I've ever read, and that might sound like blasphemy to Baba lovers, but it's called My God and My All. It's written by Elizabeth Gouge, and it's the story of just beautifully written story of St. Francis's life. I've read it 3 times, and I was fortunate to be reading it while I was walking the streets of Assisi. So a little bit about St. Francis on the way, but it's very likely that Baba emerged from behind this. This is a little passageway, and this probably was the first place that they saw that was in town. This is called San Rufino, St. Rufus Cathedral, and it was built when Francis built during Francis's childhood, and it was also the first place, or one of the first places that he preached. And he would stand up on these there's little podiums here, and he would stand up there and preach, and the people would gather around the plaza and listen to him. And Claire, St. Claire of Assisi, her family lived someplace in here. So it's likely that Claire actually was able to look out the window and watch him. So this is one of the first places that Baba probably walked by. Inside the cathedral the artwork throughout Assisi is just absolutely stunning. I mean, some of the finest Renaissance artwork, statues, paintings, and also before and after the Renaissance were painted. And because Assisi is Francis is the patron saint of Italy, so he's kind of like, everyone's favorite saint. So some of that work is just stunning. And when I walked under this statue, I kind of like felt almost like I had just walked in front of St. Francis. It was just so powerful. And right next to that, or across the hallway, is one of Claire. So the artwork is really very, very stunning, very beautiful. If you go down the hill further, down kind of to the bottom of the hill, you're going to see St. Clare Basilica. And so Claire is buried in this basilica. It's in front of a beautiful, beautiful plaza, and there is a great wall right here. So the sun comes across and lights up this incredible stone structure, and then you can just look out over the incredible Umbrian countryside down to the valley. Just very beautiful. And that's one of the views that you can see from that piazza. I call this on earth as it is in heaven. I just thought it was kind of spectacular, this repeating the imagery right there. So,
Yeah.
but the beauty is just so stunning. It's just so stunning. That is the sarcophagus of where Claire is laid to rest, and it's just so beautiful that you just stay. And I will say these places, every one of these, and those of you who have been there know this, they're all like being in Baba's tomb. If you think that 1200s is when Francis lived there, and people have been coming. He was made a saint 2 years after he passed, and the cathedrals were started very shortly. I mean, I think within a couple of years from that, they were already building the St. Francis Basilica. So if you think of the number, millions, they have like 3 or 4, I think something like 4 million people go to Assisi every year, mostly to see, St. Francis or be there in that environment. Think of the millions and millions and millions of people who have passed through that area over the years, through Assisi, and gone there to pray. It is a very, very holy city. It's just stunning. This is the piazza, the main piazza, the central square called Piazza del Comune, or the communal plaza. And so this is, of course, where people gather, all the good coffee shops, and the croissants are so good. In fact, this is Nick. I mentioned Nick before. Nick was the one who kind of goaded me to go to Italy, and right there, he calls that Nick's office, because he would be there every morning. And over here, for those of you who go to Italy, at the other end of the piazza, this building that faces it is where the information booth is, and they speak English, so it's an important piece.
On one of the buildings on that central square, there's a live cam where there's a website you can get a view of that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, really?
That's neat.
Like right
When I was there, I coordinated with a friend of mine here in town, and I was waving.
We'll have to get to lessons on how to do that.
Carolyn, what month was this photo taken?
I went there, I don't know which one. I went there May, and then October, and then May. So this is probably the May one, because I'm going around trying to get pictures at this point, the 2nd May, this year. trying to get pictures to fill in missing things from my book. So had to have a picture of the piazza and Nick's office. And here's a bunch of us, the restaurant right here. This is a really important restaurant, and that's where a bunch of Baba lovers after the Sahabas got together, and the food is wonderful, and the wine is really good if you drink wine. Table wine, it's not, you don't even have wine like that in America. It's amazing.
So fresh.
So there's a bunch of us having a good time. Now, so I don't know what pathway Baba took, but this might have been a pathway he took down to one of the next important places. This is a cathedral called Chiesa Nuova, which means the new church. It was built over Francis's family home. So we all saw this movie, Brother, Sun. How many? Anybody not see Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon? Yeah, right. So it's a favorite movie, and so you have all this imagery from that. But this is the real home. And after Francis decided he was renouncing the world, his father put him in jail down here in the kind of
The dungeon.
tried to put him in the dungeon and keep him from going out and being the wild wandering mendicant that he was. So eventually his mother, I think, let him out, and that was kind of led up to the end of him being connected to his family. And in fact, this is the location of the famous scene. It's in every one of the movie. I've seen all the different Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon and St. Francis of Assisi, and every one I could find, even the dubbed ones about St. Francis. The famous scene where he takes off his clothes and gives them back to his father, and he says, I no longer call you my father. From now on, my only father is my Father who art in heaven. And he showed up for this meeting. His father had dragged him up to see the bishop. So this is the bishop palace, and this is the church that they went to. And so he got all dressed up in his finery for the event, and then took all those clothes off and handed them back to his father and went off. And in fact, there's a famous scene, and you can't, if you look at this closely, it is the bishop wrapping his cape around Francis in that scene that you see where after he took his clothes, the bishop covered him up. So, so that's where it really happened. And that's the inside of the bishop's palace there. And that bishop actually over time became Francis's protector and his bishop that oversaw the work of the brothers, the order that he created. Now I mentioned before that Baba spoke of Bernardo da Quintavalle. So if you remember Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, he goes into the... How many of you saw Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon? Okay. Oh, most people. He goes into a room of a friend of his, and it is Bernardo da Quintavalle. And he goes and he puts his hand on his stone, and he says, this would make a good, what do you call it, cornerstone for our church. But it was also an imagery about Bernardo being the cornerstone, and in fact he was. This is Bernardo's home, and this is the one place that Baba mentioned, the stone in front of the house. That's the only place that Baba specifically pointed to. And this is another picture of it, and if you'll notice, this is quite a high area. There's not a way for a lot of light to come through, but take a look at this picture. There is, I don't know how light came into that picture. That was Baba as far as I'm concerned. That's Nick and a friend of his, somebody was visiting.
So the stone you're talking about, if you can go back, is there a stone sticking out from the platform there?
I'm thinking it might have been this, but I don't know. All we have is that statement.
And say the quote again, Baba said that.
Well, I can look it up. But as Baba said that this is where Francis wept for love of me throughout the night. So, someplace right around there. So a little bit about the city, just as you walk through the town, there are holy people walking around in blues and browns and grays and blacks, and I just was very taken by this little study in gray and pink here. But that's kind of the typical, very narrow streets, and cars would come through, and it's no big deal ever. Just because of the height of the buildings, you could faintly, they're very quiet cars, you could kind of hear them coming, and you just kind of get all over to the side, and they would carefully go by, and there's this kind of sense of respect and caring that was there even in how people drove. It was just really quite spectacular. A couple pictures of just some of what the town looks like there. I was intrigued, a lot of it, you'd have stone walls and then they'd open up a door and you could see a number of different apartments. And then this is actually the way that you walk to get to the cathedral of the Basilica of St. Francis. And what is so stunning here is Assisi is a typical medieval town up on the hill of Mount Sabastio, built in stone as a fortress, a town that's totally enclosed and supported by walls, and you can only get in through certain porticos. And then down below is the valley. So we're going to talk about the valley shortly, but this is St. Francis's tomb. This is where people will walk in, and then he's buried up here. Back in those days, in the medieval times, you wanted to get a piece of the saint's some relic from the saint. And what they did is they hid Francis. They buried him someplace where nobody could find him. It took a couple hundred years or something before they rediscovered where he was and were able to move his body and put it on display where it wouldn't be stolen. Well, that was a big concern. Anybody know what this building is? This is the Windsor Savoia. So this is where the Mondeli stayed, and look at the beautiful view again down to the valley. This is just below the basilica. And this is where the Mondeli stayed, and then he walked Baba back through town, and Baba took a shower there. So, yeah. And then this is the inside. It is still furnished the same as when Baba was there.
Wow.
They haven't changed anything. And here's proof. See this cabinet here?
Right.
It's a telephone booth. One of the originals. So,
Does it still work?
I didn't ask that, but I'd be surprised if it worked. But man, it's really so beautiful. So once again, briefly, they came down. Then they came down to San Rufino, down to Santa Chiara, down to this is where the Bishop's Palace is, and then down to Windsor Savoia. And I don't know, there's no mention of Baba going over to the Basilica, but I'm thinking maybe he did. This was the place, now there's a, hey, what's important when you're there, right? So I was always looking, there's a couple other famous places that are associated with St. Francis. And one of them is San Damiano. So of course San Damiano is the place where Francis, when he was just starting to have this longing for God, and he was just disconnecting more and more from the world. And San Damiano was a broken down church. It had fallen into ruin. And he went in one day, and there was a big crucifix there, and he prayed before the crucifix. And the crucifix spoke to him, and it said, "Rebuild my church." And so Francis thought that Francis had done stonework as a teenager. He knew how to build. So actually, the initial experience of Francis in rebuilding the church was going and laying stones in different places. And he actually rebuilt 3 different churches until the time came that he got permission from the Pope to become an order. And what happened, and you see this in all the movies, he goes down to the Pope and petitions to be able to be, this is part of this, okay. So he petitions to be an order, get permission to be an order from the Pope. When he first goes in, he's written this, rule on a little piece of parchment, and he somehow runs into the Pope in the hallway and falls down on his knees. Now you have to remember, at this point, everything is, never bathed and, ragged and barefoot. They walked all the way from Assisi to Rome. It's a 4-hour drive by car. So, and he falls down with this piece of paper, and the Pope is like, take this guy out of here. And so he goes out, and who does he run it with? He's got his brothers with him. Who do they run into? But the same bishop who happened to be in town from Assisi. So this bishop had pull. He goes back in and asks permission for them to come back. And in the meantime, Francis has gone and prayed and asked God to help him. So when he, in the meantime, the Pope remembered that he had had a dream and that there was some rough character in the dream, and there was this image of the church, and it was starting to fall down and collapse. And this was a time when the church was very corrupt and very much about wealth and money and ownership. And in the dream, there's this rough-looking character, and he puts his shoulder under the part of the church that's falling down and lifts it back up. And then the Pope realized that this guy was somebody that was going to help revive the church. And in fact, Francis did. Francis was enormously instrumental in bringing back spirituality to the church. It had very much been lost at that time. So I'd seen that picture, Brother, Sun, Sister Moon. I saw that picture of San Damiano, where they're all running down through the poppies to get to San Damiano. And I looked from all over Assisi to see where can you see San Damiano. Now San Damiano later became the cloister for Clare and the sisters. So it's very interesting that even in that early time that Francis was working on San Damiano, he knew that the sisters were going to be there. But it was like so protected that you couldn't even see it from anywhere in town. But I had taken this picture from right here. And I looked at that picture and I went, oh my God, there's one place in town you can see San Damiano from. And that's San Damiano down there. So that was the first place that he rebuilt. This is walking down through the olive groves to San Damiano. That's the entry to San Damiano. And this is the courtyard. And you can see how it's a little bit in the valley, and up above is Mount Subasio. And that's the bell tower. Now the other important place, this is one other scene. If you remember from Brother, Sun, Sister Moon, when they first show Francis in the snow rebuilding the church, this is almost identical to that scene in the movie. I just thought that was kind of cool. Now, one of the important places in Assisi is a place called the Pujuncola. And it was one of the most profound places that I personally experienced my whole time there. I had a very interesting experience. I'm going to share that with you shortly. But you can really see, here is the valley. Now we're down in the valley, and there is Assisi above you. And down in the valley is where the main place, once an order was formed, this is where the brothers came and stayed and lived for quite some time. And it remains today the hub and core of the Franciscan order. I'm not Catholic, but St. Francis is so inspiring. It just touched me no end. And I heard about this Porciuncula, the third place that he rebuilt, and I walked into this spectacular beauty, just incredible artwork beyond imagination. And I go past one alcove after another with unbelievable artwork. But I'm wanting to find the Porciuncula, this little place that he rebuilt. So I walk down and I'm looking at all these arches and I see this guy and I say, "Can you tell me where the Porciuncula is?" And he goes, "It's right behind you." And I walked in and I thought it was the altar, but it's actually the whole cathedral is built around, or the basilica is built around the Porciuncula. And so I'm just in awe of this place, and all these nuns are going in. I'm going to just read you a little story about it. I followed along. Ahead of me were some Franciscan nuns clothed in gray habits, white headdresses. I dropped in behind, then followed them inside. A single row of small wooden pews with places to kneel lined each side. Some of the nuns took places on the sides and knelt to pray. One space was left in the back, and I sat down. A priest came in and softly led the nuns and sang the rosary in Italian, as others wandered through. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus." How I understood this in Italian, I'm not sure, but I knew, and I said it in English. As I sat there, I felt a profound deepening of my own experience, becoming quiet inside and more connected into the holiness of this place and of the Spirit. My mind was brought back to my question about the content of St. Francis's prayers. When I was reading My God and My All, I was just like, and then he went and prayed about this, and then he went and prayed about this, and then he went and prayed about that. I'm like, what could he be talking about to God that much? Suddenly, I found myself engaged in a prayer, praising God, talking to Baba or Jesus, but the words just seemed to flow through me. Was I praying, or was I hearing this prayer? I couldn't tell. It has touches of words of Baba's prayer in them, and touches of Christian prayers I've heard. But they were just from the heart, and the words flowed easily through me, seeming to fill me with no effort or volition on my part. Ah, my mind thought, if I could only preserve these wonderful words somehow. I wanted to save this prayer, to be able to remember it. It was so beautiful and simple, so heartfelt. If I only had my computer, but I'd left it back in town. Maybe I can dictate it into my cell phone. Ridiculous. I could just imagine how invasive it would be for people to hear me talking on a cell phone. So I realized I just had to be grateful for such a divine gift, to be quiet inside and just listen to it. The prayer continued. It felt timeless, as if it were coming from the very walls of this ancient chapel. Perhaps for another 15 minutes, this praise and gratitude of the heart kept moving through me. Some of the words were very Christian, some Eastern, some sounded like Baba, some specifically from Francis, but they were all simple and pure. I felt I was being given an answer to my question as to the nature of St. Francis's prayers. Even as I left the Porciuncula, it felt as if the prayer continued, and I thought of a paraphrase from Baba's New Life, that this prayer would go on being prayed, even if there was no one to pray it. Yet there was still another gift that day. When I went back to my room that evening and sat at my computer, I began writing my daily travelogue, as I did each day, to send to family and friends. Then, amazingly, as I began writing the part about my visit to the Porciuncula, it was as if I was back in the small pew and the prayer was streaming back. I could feel nothing but reverence and wonder and gratitude as I typed. It was as if I were just taking dictation, just as I had wished in the Persian Kala. And this is the gift. And I'm going to end with this little prayer. Beloved and most precious Lord, you are the beginning and end of all things. You are most kind and loving. You are my mother, my father, my closest friend. You are the one who knows me better than any other. You are the one who guides me when I am lost, who holds my hand through all of life. You are most compassionate and benevolent. You love me in spite of my countless errors and sins. You are patient with all my faults, completely forgiving, beyond forgiving, for you accept me as I am and see me as who I will be when I am one with you. You give me everything. Everything is from you, and there is nothing that is not from you and of you. How great and wondrous you are. You are everything and everywhere. You are the breath we breathe, the warmth of the sun, the earth and water of our bodies, and also all else that exists. You are the very life that is in us, in all that lives, and also in all that is inanimate. You exist in all that is, and yet beyond all that is, unfathomable and beyond comprehension. You in the sun, the stars, the moon, and all aspects of this earth, yet you exist in the spaces and sounds and the energy between all things manifest. Help us to love you more and more, most bountiful Lord. Help us to desire only you, to serve only you, to see you in everything and in all creatures, in all occurrences of life, in every moment of our lives, and to rejoice in your great generosity in all things, until we return home to you, our only true home. Thank you, most kind and loving. Atar Meher Baba.
Jake?